So how should we do this? We could hand this book around. This is God Makes the Rivers to Flow, which is a collection of passages for meditation. And one of them is a poem by Jalaluddin Rumi. If I could interrupt myself for a second, Tal, you'll be perfectly familiar with this dynamic. We're talking about ancient Persian poetry. There are, I think from the 13th century, there are two really famous epic poems. And one of them is called the Shah-Nama, and the other is called the Simurgh. And the Simurgh is an allegorical poem by Farad ad-Din Attar, if I'm not mistaken, about these birds. And there's a group of birds, 30 of them, and they receive this mission that you have to find the Simurgh. So they set out on this huge quest, and they cross the desert and the Hindu Kush, and they're searching and searching, and they find the Simurgh. And Simurgh in Persian means 30 birds. So they go halfway across the world and find themselves. Yep. You come here and get extra points in Persian poetry. Anyway, this is a wonderful poem, and it fits our purposes very, very well. One semester when I was teaching it, I had a colleague who was from Iran. He had escaped from, well, basically he'd gotten freed from prison after being falsely accused. And having to listen to the Quran being blared at him every day. Oh. Anyway, his story notwithstanding, I had him come to my class with a younger fellow, and they had the text of this poem in Persian. And so they were able to follow through and see how accurate the translation is. So basically, I'm happy to report that it's basically very good. The last part is a little trick that's put in by the American translator, Coleman Barks. So it's very clever. It's something that Rumi probably would have liked, but the fact is he didn't write it. So we won't stress too much about the last stanza. But maybe if we each read 2 stanzas, we'll get through it and try and hold on to it. I'll read it slowly, so jot down points that are meaningful, helpful for you. Okay. So I don't know how familiar you are or are not with Rumi. If you live in California in the year 2000, whatever it is, you're probably pretty aware of this guy.
The most translated poem in the whole world.
In the whole world, the most prolific and the most translated. The Masnavi is, what, 270,000 poems, something like that. Okay.
Maybe since the reading started on that side last round.
Patty, do you have a copy? No. Okay, we'll hand the book around. Okay. Everything you see has its roots in the unseen world. The forms may change, yet the essence remains the same. Every wondrous sight will vanish, every sweet word will fade. But do not be disheartened. The source they come from is eternal, growing, branching out, giving new life and new joy.
Why do you weep? That source is within you, and this whole world is springing up from it. The source is full. Its waters are ever flowing. Do not grieve. Drink your fill. Don't think it will ever run dry. This is the endless ocean.
From the moment you came into this world, a ladder was placed in front of you that you might transcend it. From earth, you became plant. From plant, you became animal. Afterwards, you became a human being, endowed with knowledge, intellect, and faith.
Behold the body, born of dust, how perfect it has become. Why should you fear its end? When were you ever made less by dying? When you pass beyond this human form, no doubt you will become an angel and soar through the heavens. But don't stop there. Even heavenly bodies grow old.
pass again from the heavenly realm and plunge into the ocean of consciousness. Let the drop of water that is you become 100 mighty seas.
But do not think that the one drop alone becomes the ocean. The ocean too becomes the drop.
Okay. That's very nice, that last line, but unfortunately, it's not legit. Okay. So how does this help? I can pass this around, maybe if people want to have it in front of them. So obviously, Rumi is not a creationist.
Yeah, here's your evolution.
Yep. Yep. I don't know if you saw that the drawing, a cartoon. You know, the creationists are forced to say that dinosaurs and people coexisted. So there's this beautiful picture of Jesus entering Jerusalem, and he's riding on a Tyrannosaurus Rex. Yeah. Okay.
Again, sorry everyone, I have two questions. That's what happens when you're outside of the circle. You have this like individual like drive, like stuff. It's all about me. So two questions. If you could talk about evolution and the purpose of life, and does the purpose evolve, and if so, what's the relationship between evolution and purpose?
Yeah.
And then in the poem, the drink your fill, the idea, and I could see how that could be interpreted in both the pseudo purpose and the real purpose. And like drink your fill could be very much like just use up the world until you're done, you know, or it could mean, you know, drink your the fear that comes that in loving that there would be some end to love, and that he's saying don't worry about that, keep loving.
Yeah.
Love will still be there. So I saw that.
Okay, two good questions. One, you know, what is the nature of the process of evolution? And two, could it not be misinterpreted when he says drink your fill? Because, you know, I remember these ads for Olympia beer, which was really, this hurt because that was my favorite beer at the time. It says, you know, you only go around once in life, so drink your fill. Yeah.
What I got from that was that if you are this full water, this ocean, this vast thing, to drink your fill would mean to realize that you are vast.
Right.
It's that realization. That's what I got from that.
In fact, he has set that up. He's protected you by saying the forms disappear, but the essence remains the same.
From the very beginning, that's the setting.
That's the setting.
Unseen world.
Yeah.
Everything we see has this.
So the ocean is identified with the essence and not with the forms. So he's kind of protected you from that misinterpretation, which has earned him a place in Classics 10 or whatever this course was. Yeah, so that's one thing. But, okay, when he talks about evolution, it obviously is evolution to what we call higher and higher forms of life. And it, you know, I had taught this poem about 10 times before I finally realized, you know how it is, these experiences are so vivid, you remember where you were sitting. I was on the lawn in front of Stevens Hall, in between Stevens and the Campanile, and I said, oh my God. You read that little line where he says, but don't stop there. If you read that carefully, there's a pivot that happens there, that you do not have agency when you stopped being a plant and became an animal, stopped being an animal and became a human. But when you, after the human life, you get to choose whether you're going to go further or not. So that's where the poem really kind of rivets in. And go further, of course, in the direction which is defined as higher consciousness and more enduring being. You know, angels live longer than humans, whatever they are, but even they are not forever. So forever is your goal. Yeah.
What I'm hearing then is
again, there's this sort of subtle argument in, or there's rather not subtle, an argument in creationism that, evolution isn't real.
Mm-hmm.
Now, looking at the argument for evolution from a materialist,
Mm-hmm.
a separate, isolated, alienated materialist perspective, is also sort of accepting the premises that we don't change, in a way. And so it's like they get so far in evolution and they say they can deny that there's further evolution that takes place. So what do you all think about that?
Yeah, anybody? Yeah.
Are you talking about kind of like our egocentrism, where we're like we are the highest form of evolution, like we are the result, like our conscious being is kind of what evolution has led to, and almost the thought that it's going to like plateau there?
Well, what does evolution, let me rephrase it, like what does evolution, what comes next in evolution from a standpoint of materialism? Is there any further evolution that takes place in that paradigm?
This may or may not be what you're getting at, Stephanie, but if you are a materialist and you think that you are a material body, then further evolution is kind of scary to contemplate. What does that mean? We'd have a third eye, or, I like this human body as it is. But when you... Bigger thumbs, faster texting, which is happening actually. But when you realize that, thanks, Patty. When you realize, when he gets to the human state in the poem, he doesn't say, and then you became a human being with flat fingernails. He says, and then you became a human being endowed with knowledge, understanding, and faith. In other words, these are consciousness attributes. So further evolution could take place in the realm of consciousness and have nothing to do with the body. And that's, in fact, what the Gandhis of this world were all about. They didn't need a different body to become illumined. In fact, Gandhi's body was not the most beautiful that anybody had ever seen, apparently. There was this British woman who did a sculpture of him, did a bust of him, said, thank God that man was homely. Because he had the most attractive power I've ever seen. And if he were good looking to boot, it would be a terrible problem. So, yeah.
Stephanie, when you were talking about how high could a materialist go, like what comes after that, it just sounded like nihilism. Like there is nowhere to go because you're nihilistic and there's nothing after you die. I mean, that's what comes up for me. Like if your wealth is only found on earth, then there's nothing left.
By the way, proof of consciousness is happening right here. Fancy is dreaming that she's running on the beach.
Do you think that negates evolution in a way? Does nihilism, in a sense, like materialist nihilism, does that negate the premises of evolution, or is that just saying like this is as far as end of the line, like stop here?
I've always felt it's kind of absurd to, on the one hand, believe in evolution, and on the other hand, believe that it stopped dead as soon as Charles Darwin was born. But on the other hand, if you ask where is it going from here, and you think of yourself as merely a body, it's a very disturbing question, and you want to kind of shut it out. Yes, Robin.
When I read this last phrase, it reminds me of the circular concept of the yugas in Hindu culture, Kali Yuga, Treta Yuga, Dwapara Yuga, and then Satya Yuga. And it's kind of, and then I can relate this concept with this concept of evolution.
Yeah.
And when I think of this, and then from here, when I think of where we are moving towards, collectively, where we are evolving, and then it kind of frustrates me because when I see this evolution in a circular way, then I see there is no point of arrival.
Okay, I
just finish.
Please.
Because, like Rumi says, but do not think that the drop alone becomes the ocean. The ocean too becomes the drop. I mean, ultimately, we're gonna return back to the same cycle.
You're not the first person to be concerned about that. And the fact that if you have a circular model of time, what does that say about evolution? Because, you know, why bother? We're only going to come back and have to be a freshman again at some point. I believe that what we're doing there is we're getting the scale wrong. I mean, the evolutionary cycle is orders of magnitude more enormous than our petty little cycle. And we really can't understand what will happen when we're completely evolved. We have to kind of trust that it does make sense for us to strive to get as high as we can. As Goenka says, a human being is the only creature that can look within himself and find the cause of suffering and overcome it. So we have to believe that it's meaningful to do that, and what that says about the next cycle, it's beyond our scope even to understand it. That's the best I think I can do with that.
Also the whole thing of self-awareness, in Farsi the word for God is khoda, which means come to yourself.
Wow.
So it's just one word.
Yeah.
Come.
Yeah.
Khoda. Means come,
Uh-huh.
and then khod is self.
Whoa.
Come to self. So that, I think, in and of itself, just by one word, it's a return to self.
Yeah.
In Arabic they call it, in Sufism they call it tawhid.
Uh-huh. Yeah, Tawhid, that's right. And in Judaism it's called...
I was trying to find it in Judaism, I forgot what it's called.
That's the word for return. It starts with a T. Teshuvah? Yeah, Teshuvah. Yeah.
Fatima, that's really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
That's good.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Different truths may be expressed in different languages about human beings, and because we have different languages, we get caught into these things of not being able to talk to each other and tell each other what we mean. So, I mean, maybe as people travel more and learn more languages, there's some people that can connect different worlds. And
Yeah. You know, I just realized while you were saying that, another aha erlebnis. We keep going around saying how the wisdom tradition is going to be so helpful for science. And you see this all the time, because, for example, you have this man, Amit Goswami. He's a nuclear physicist, quantum theorist. From his name, I can tell you that he's a highly educated Brahmin. If he's a Goswami, he knows the four Vedas backwards and forwards. And he's so far ahead of the pack. And it's kind of not fair, because he has all of this Vedanta in his bloodstream, so he can tell what's bound to be true, and then all he has to do is go and do the math. It's not fair. So I'm always...
That's what they say about Jews. They're like, oh, they know all that stuff from Kabbalah.
Oh, yes. Okay. But so we're constantly saying that, having a little bit of mystical awareness is tremendously helpful for science. And Vivekananda said, one glance from the goddess of wisdom stuns 1,000 scholars. Actually, Ramakrishna said that. But it also works the other way around, because you can take good heuristic mechanisms in science and apply them to the wisdom tradition. And one of them is, one of the best things about science when it's working well is that it's verifiable. If, I go test the law of gravity in Japan,
that's the point of science.
That is kind of the point, is to find out what is universal in the material world. And so that is also a good way of sifting out the wheat from the chaff in religion. Because if one religion says something that is not said by another religion, we have a problem. But if you dig down to the level of the religion where they're saying the same thing, that is in itself a validity. And I know when I was teaching the course, it was interesting teaching it. That's okay, she'll be back. It was interesting teaching this course to younger people because the younger generation believes in relativism. They do not believe that there's any absolute truth. I felt really sorry for them.
When you talk about science, it's just like another belief system. It is the Western belief system, kind of like colonial belief system, and so it's like another tradition. And I think that all these traditions or religions, whatever, because science kind of is a religion, and it's like all roads kind of lead to the same place. Some take longer, some are more of a direct path, but
yeah, but I think science, because it's natural science, it is derived from nature. Let's remember that numbers came from Arabs looking at stars in the middle of the desert, and that's how they decided that, there can't even be ratios in numbers. So it's because it has a natural source. I think that's why it makes so much sense to people, and that's why people can believe in it like it's a religion, because it actually has this root in the ultimate truth.
In fact, the way I've heard it explained is that science, properly practiced, is the search for truth in the outside world, and religion, or whatever you want to call it, properly practiced, is the search for truth in the inside world. And both of them have discovered that there's no outside inside, that there's only one truth. But science took 5,000 years to get there. Mysticism got there a lot earlier on, but they both realized the same thing. So, I mean, we've been saying that science, to be science, has to be consistent with itself. But I think we should go further and say that science, to be science, should also be consistent with the deepest revelations of mysticism.
There's this line in the Quran that says there are signs in nature to prove the existence of God.
I remember that too. Yeah. Yeah. If you need...
That's how you get God from science, which is something that's happening now.
Yeah, Robin?
When you say younger people believes in relativism, I find myself in that category, in relative idea, and then it's not that I don't see that there is that absolute truth. I do feel that, but I find very risky or very hard to communicate what I feel the truth is. Yeah. And because it's very difficult to communicate, I find myself very comfortable in the idea, in the world of relativism, because I see that, I mean, how to define truth, or how to say that I know the truth, how to communicate. Because when I see all the conflicts that we are facing, it's because one party believes this is truth, the other party believes, no, this is the truth, and they fight between that, and then...
Well, you are a pure Gandhian. That's exactly what he said. But he said that there is an absolute truth, but no embodied human being can possess it entirely. So for us, the truth is always going to be relative, which is not denying the existence of an absolute truth, but denying the capacity of an individual embodied human being to possess that truth. So therefore, he said, we must adopt nonviolence, because otherwise these quarrels will lead to suffering. And anything, we are not required to know the absolute truth. We're required to try to be seeking for it honestly. So that when we discover that something is untrue, instead of making up excuses and pretending, oh, there is no such thing as evolution because it conflicts with my worldview, we would say, whoa, I have to reconsider my worldview. And you can get tremendous breakthroughs that way. That's how Einstein said, he was asked, how did you make these incredible discoveries? And he said, by questioning one accepted axiom. one thing that everybody believed in. You're not supposed to question this. It's true. He questioned it. And he had that breakthrough to relativity. Okay. I think maybe as soon as Patty gets back without unduly embarrassing her, we might kind of go over and wrap up and see what we felt good about today. What do we think we came up with?
Just a curiosity.
Okay.
Out of the Gandhi quote you just said, no one human being is an absolute truth.
Mm-hmm.
So he's talking about ordinary beings, right? He's not talking about realized beings.
That's true, but I think he would shrink away if you accused him of being a realized being, because he never wanted to be taken as such. Remember his autobiography was called The Story of My Experiments with Truth. And he was experimenting and tinkering till the very end. But that's where I find that Rumi's model, where he differentiates between the forms and the individual things, the sweet words, and the essence that they come from, is very helpful, because the essence is eternal and unchanging, but we have to be able to see completely through the relative in order to perceive it. And there have been people who've gotten so close that you might as well say, yeah, they saw it. They were there.
I'm sure you've heard the thing of like the dark barn, where everybody was sticking their hand in and touching the animal that was inside the barn.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I guess that's, somebody thought it was a leg.
Yeah.
It's just our nature to have limited capacity.
Yep. Well, I don't think.
Well, physically bound human beings inside their bodies, they're limited.
The problem, Fatima, is the extent to which we identify ourselves with that body.
Yeah.
That's what limits us to the capabilities of the body.
Or how much we attach.
Yeah. It's almost two ways of saying the same thing. Yeah.
What comes up for me in this part is the going back to the Svadharma and the Nimishadharma.
Mm-hmm. Nimishadharma.
Because you brought up the Gita theory of action, of taking the right pebble and throwing it in the pond, and the results take care of themselves, and that sense of detached action and right cause, and I think right cause that ties into the idea of Sarvodaya, the uplift of everybody, like it's sort of like the litmus test, like who benefits from this action? Is it just me, or is it a wider? So, but in the Misha Dharma, we find ourselves confronted with the idea of action, that our actions, we can express truth through our actions, versus more than through our words, but we can also express truth through our thoughts. So, like being unjudgmental when somebody has a different truth is an expression, and it can, there's always that choice of following Dharma in that way. That if you're saying something that I say you're a creationist and I believe in evolution, you're saying something that I disagree with, not to judge you. And that gives me, it widens the sphere of action in the moment, because at any moment you're having a thought.
Yeah, we are in a mental state every single moment, and we have the opportunity to align that mental state with Dharma at every moment. And the most successful criterion is not to degrade another person, even in your mind, not to feel alienation, so that you can accept difference without judging it as separation. Yeah, I think that would kind of wrap up the moment-by-moment existence of human beings on planet Earth. Okay. I'm going to jot down some notes here. This is what we covered today, by the way. Took us. Let's see. I don't know, maybe we should just go around, or just ask people to pick pitch in as they feel like it. What came up for us if we were riding on BART and the person next to us said, "What is the Dharma? You know, or, what is the purpose of life?" Or suppose we were on that train with Tenzin Palmo, and this inspector was saying, "Can you help me find the meaning of life?" What would we say to that poor benighted person?
I would say no.
Huh?
I would say no. You have to.
That's a good answer.
That would be your dharma to find
That's
your own.
right. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, let's close it up and go ahead. Okay. Let's maybe start with the question we started with. What is any kind of evidence that we can think of that life as a whole has a purpose, has a direction? Suppose you find yourself in a bar arguing with a nihilist. He says, "Life ain't got no purpose." He says. They can't even talk good, nihilists. What would you say?
Even an ant has a purpose.
Okay. Okay, how would we kind of at least give a step towards defining it? What is the purpose of an ant?
It has its own desire. It has its own will. It's what was the word we were using?
Were you thinking drive? We used that term drive at one point.
My word is desire. Well, not
Okay.
my word, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I would say desire. Everything has its own desire.
Uh-huh.
Its own, but yeah, its
Yeah.
own drive.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah, there was a very intriguing article by this. I think he's the only person who got 2 Nobel Prizes, one in chemistry and one in biology, Albert St. Georgi. And he wrote an article called "The Drive in Living Matter to Perfect Itself." It was a superb question for a biologist to ask. How is this organism seeking to perfect itself? Which kind of implies, does it not, that there is a perfection? Because elsewise, what would you be striving for?
We can call it evolution, except that that term is just used up and useless now. So
Yeah. Well, I actually think we should try to get it back.
reclaim.
We should reclaim the term evolution.
Occupy evolution.
Occupy evolution. Why not? Why not?
That's
You've-
going to be the title of the blog
That's
post for this.
Yeah, occupy
There
evolution.
you go, actually.
Good.
it's a re-evolution. We're constantly evolving,
Mm-hmm.
Evolving, it's called.
discovering, rediscovering.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe something that was forgotten or overlooked.
There's an interesting shift that happens in the ancient world. I'm thinking about the Greek world now, where you had all of these myths about the perfect world. And for centuries, people believed implicitly that that perfect world had existed in the past, and we were devolving from that world. And at some point, in fact, this kind of leads to the classical period, for some reason, and nobody knows how these things happen, that thing flipped around, and they felt that perfection was in the future. And that was incredibly energizing for these people, because, to sit around saying, the longer I live, the worse it gets. So, let's drink our fill and smoke our fill. And, is very, very different in terms of being dispiriting and from there is a perfection. So then all you need, I guess, are 2 things. You have to feel that this is a meaningful process. It's not just going to some random endpoint. The perfection is better than non-perfection. And B, probably most important, that you can play some role in it. You've got to discover what is your buy-in in this whole process. And as we were saying, that has both an individual and a collective answer, because we can evaluate a culture on the basis of how efficiently it is helping human beings evolve to a state of perfection, which, as Gandhi said, we don't have to reach it in order for it to do its job. We just have to strive for it.
I guess if we could accept that human beings have two dimensions, the horizontal and the vertical dimension of existence, then evolution in the horizontal would be like further complexity in our bodies, whatever, all this stuff, and then evolution in the vertical dimension would be all this.
I'll tell you what, I'm going to see your deck and raise you one in poker terms. I'm going to actually escalate that a little bit in terms of our recouping the word evolution. I would say that the horizontal stuff is just change. And you can change and change and change. And you know, in fact, one of the slogans of the Nazi era was change. Never mind which way. Did Obama know that? In fact, I found myself wondering that. You know, actually, they called it Die Neue Welle. You know, the new wave. It's going to sweep out all this old stuff that we don't like. But I would reserve. I think we would be wise to reserve the word evolution for change that actually brings us closer to that perfection, even though it's only a tiny, tiny bit. And go ahead, Patty.
So I guess I'm kind of struggling with the word perfection that you're using. Probably I'm just not up on the terminology. I mean, I guess I would use. Could I use the word union instead? Or is that...
Okay. Well, our founding fathers said in order to create a more perfect union, so they kind of got...
I mean, union with whatever you perceive the Creator to be, a union with people, union with...
Becoming more godlike, I guess.
Yeah, that moving towards that.
Okay.
Is that what?
Yeah, I think...
Or is it something else?
Yeah. Well, as I think we were stumbling across from earlier on, one of the criteria for forward motion and evolution is to break down the separateness between self and others and expand our consciousness. In fact, do you want to grab that Einstein quote behind you? That might actually be the best way to wrap up that particular thought. Mind you, this is a scientist speaking, the greatest in the 20th century. Oh, do I get to read it? Okay. I'm the one that's closest to the microphone anyway. Okay. The context for this statement is he got a letter from a rabbi whose wife had died, and he was inconsolable. He couldn't get over it. The grief. He said, if I go on being like this the rest of my life, you know, life isn't worth living. It was kind of like Augustine when he lost his friend. And this is how Einstein said about helping him to overcome that grief. He said, a human being is part of the whole, called by us the universe, a part limited in time and space. I'm going to change the gender here a little bit. We experience ourselves, our thoughts and feelings, as something separated from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of our consciousness. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to affection for a few persons nearest to us. Our task must be, okay, purpose of life, our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. So you notice he gives us a very practical definition of identification with others, and that is compassion. That's why His Holiness said compassion is the religion of this age. And that is the only way we're going to really reach others, not by, you know, all hugging each other like they were doing at my brother's concert.
Still do that?
Yeah, they do. In certain corners. Yeah. Okay, well, I'm starting to have the thought that in order to really wrap up and kind of list out everything, we're going to need to go home and let this mature a little bit. Stephanie?